This is Catherine Parker from The Haunting of Hill House. You're listening to Derek Thomas and the Monday Morning Critic podcast.
I still can't believe we've got so much in common.
We don't have anything in common.
Why'd you say that, though?
Well, the big difference is you haven't given up yet, have you? I mean, me, I would quite happily die right now. If I had enough money, I would take as many drugs as I possibly could.
My next guest filmography includes Game of Thrones, Kick-Ass, Bohemian Rhapsody, and the absolutely wonderful Afterlife. He is an actor. He's been a playwright. He is a wonderful documentarian. His name is Tim Plester. Tim, thank you so much. How's everything?
Good evening. Well, it's evening here in London. Yes, I'm fine. I think before we spoke, I mentioned, with the time difference, it's actually almost my bedtime here.
Yep.
So I'll try and remain awake and lucid as much as possible. But I would normally be getting into bed in my pajamas around about this time.
Yeah, and I thank the world of you for coming on, and I can't even thank you. If we were face to face, I'd buy you a lager or whatever you drink.
I like a nice bitter or a brown ale is my drink of choice.
Fair enough. So I have to say, before we get into your acting and some of your training, I didn't realize how wonderful and how really skilled you were at developing documentaries. My goodness, Tim, not that I didn't think I would think otherwise, but, you think, somebody's going to be an actor. It's the traditional path to acting. But you're a pretty talented guy. You've got playwriting. You are absolutely wonderful at developing documentaries. Touch a little bit about that, if you would.
It's kind of the two things in a way. I mean, they are connected in my distant past of, how I got into doing any of this, really, is that I think, my initial kind of interest in it was wanting to be an actor. I kind of understood at an early age, I think, that was something, that was a job, and people did it, and I might be able to aspire to do it one day. And somewhere along the line, I started to write as well. And then I think I had this notion that how they would work together is that I could be a writer and then write the best parts for myself to be in, and be a writer-actor. That was my... when I was... I'm talking about when I was, 10, 11 years old. I wrote my first play, which I don't have a copy of anymore. It was an adaptation of The Hound of the Baskervilles, the Sherlock Holmes adventure, which I loosely adapted from the original source material by Sir Conan Doyle, and then cast myself as Sherlock Holmes in it. So I think, in a way, it was a kind of quite an egotistical thing. As a younger man, I would write plays, and then I would be in them as well as the lead actor. And slowly, I went to college, and I continued to do that there. At that point, I had a real passion that I wanted to be a kind of comedic actor, and I'm thinking about going right back to Monty Python, and I'd grown up. My dad had grown up not making me watch Monty Python, but my dad was a Monty Python fan, so I'd been exposed to that kind of anarchic British humour at an early age, and I think that was something that I thought I wanted to do when I was at college. So I was still writing then, but it was more sketches, comedy sketches. And somewhere along the line, while I was at college, I decided I got more and more interested in the writing, and slightly less interested in the acting. And the writing took over for a while, and I ran a theatre company when I first left college, and wasn't acting at all. And then I fell back into acting. I think the thing that I was scared about with pursuing acting actually as a career when I left college or university was I just had that fear of sitting waiting for the phone to ring and I just felt I couldn't face it, and I wanted to do something that I felt I could be doing something more proactive. I just felt it was very, you basically had to sit and wait for the work to come to you, and I felt if I was a writer, I could always be developing things. I could be at home, writing work. I could do. You can do that on your own, but acting, you have to. You can't act on your own. It doesn't work that way. And so originally, the first things that I made were not documentaries at all. My route to documentary is quite a long one, really. And the first short films I made were narrative comedies, and I only fell into making documentaries about 10 years ago. And that was, again, it was a personal story that came to me. It was a story about the village that I grew up in, and a story that was connected to my father and my uncle, and kind of ideas of English identity. And my uncle basically suggested to me one day that somebody should make a film about. There's this English tradition of dancing called Morris dancing, which is open to much ridicule in the UK. And I'd always laughed at it myself, and in fact had run away from it as a young man and never wanted to do it. And I know there's a lot of Morris dancing in the US as well, and in Canada and Australia. There are Morris dancing teams. And my uncle just told me the story about what Morris dancing meant to him and to the village where I grew up, and he suggested that somebody should make a film about it. And I thought about it for a little while, and I thought, well, why don't I make it? And I didn't really know anything about documentaries. It wasn't a passion of mine. And so I think that the kind of moving into documentary came from a very personal connection initially, and then I found out that I really enjoyed doing it, and I found it was a really interesting way to work. And I think there's that thing about a documentary that I enjoy. It's also nerve-wracking, that unlike writing a script, which I'd been used to, you end up writing the film in the edit. You kind of do it, you flip the whole thing, and you actually, if your instincts are right, on the day you think you're filming the right kind of things and meeting the right kind of people, but ultimately you start to do the writing when you start to do the editing of the piece. So
and you're clearly a skilled writer. I mean, that just is pretty evident. But are you able to? Do you have any? Are you also a documentarian that films his own documentaries, or is that something you pass off to somebody else or hire somebody else to do?
What do you mean, kind of doing behind the scenes?
No. Like, so when you have, I know you did a documentary. I believe, was it on Shirley Collins? Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
So when you do that, do you hire somebody to do the camera work, or are you able to do that on your own?
Gotcha. I'm with you. I am not a self-shooter, as I believe the term is. I learned that term actually last year. I am not a self-shooter. I work with another director called Rob Curry, who I've made 2 feature films with now and 2 shorts documentaries. 2 shorts and 2 features. And neither of us, Rob does a little bit of camera work, but I don't do any. We always hire people in to do that side of things, to do camera and sound. And in fact, last year, the most recent projects me and Rob worked on together, we shot in the south, in the deep south of America last year, which was, I'd never been to that part of the US before and had always wanted to go. And we hired a chap from New York, actually, called Damien, who came down and met us in Charlottesville, and we went on a road trip with him, and he handled picture and sound, and me and Rob kind of handled questioning and kind of tried to steer it in the direction that we thought it should go. But I would like, I think, to be able to be a bit more hands-on behind the camera, but it's on my list of things to do, Derek.
It seems very
camera. Yes,
it seems very difficult, and I got to say, I was on your website today, which is fantastic. I learned a lot about you. I mean, I did more research than that, obviously, but I was watching your film reel and so forth. It's you have a couple projects coming up in the documentary portion of your life. It's I want to say Grey Owl and Daniel Boone. Is that correct?
Yeah, so both of those are in quite early stages of development, but they're kind of there is connective tissue between the two. I think they're both about ideas of wilderness. I think, and yeah, Daniel Boone. We did a bit of research on when we were over in the States last year. We actually spent a bit of time in Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky. And we spent some time with this poet called Morris Manning, who's from Kentucky, and he wrote a book back in, I think, 2004 called A Companion for Owls. And it's a collection of poems written in the voice of Daniel Boone. And I read that book, or I read not just that book, but a couple of Morris Manning's books when I was filming a HBO project in Canada 4 years ago. And that's when I first started thinking about maybe doing something about Daniel Boone, because it'd been a figure that I'd known about for a long time. It's quite, I think, not a lot of English people know very much about Daniel Boone, but because I've always had a bit of a vested interest in kind of the American West and ideas of wilderness, he was definitely a name that I knew. I didn't know a great deal about him, but I knew something about the mythology around Boone. And Morris Manning's book is a fantastic piece of work. It's a biography as poems. It's just it really kind of spoke to me and made me think that there was definitely some room in that to maybe use Morris's poems maybe as a starting point to make some kind of documentary about Boone. And it just strikes me that nobody's touched upon Boone for a while that I'm aware of.
Right.
There were popular TV shows, I know, and I think in the 50s and 60s, but he's kind of fallen out of favour in a way, I think. And I just thought he might be a figure worth reappraising. But we'll see. Whether we'll get round to doing that or not, we will have to wait and see. It's always, every time I finish a documentary project, I kind of half think maybe I've done the spade work now to get the next one done without much fuss. But every single project always kind of feels like the first project in terms of, okay, where do we get the money for this one from? It never seems there's somebody there's never people going, hey, what do you want to do next, guys? Here's a pot of money. It just it doesn't work like that, or it doesn't in my experience anyway. So it will be a struggle to get either of those projects off the ground, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
It seems like a great idea. And my last question to you about documentaries and history and so forth: do you consider yourself a guy who just loves history because you're from a part of the world that oozes history? My goodness, if I had to list 3 places in the world that has the most history, England would certainly be maybe in the top 2. Have you ever thought about something in England or pertaining to England or England related? Or UK related too, I guess I could say.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, exactly. My kind of passion for history is very much American history. For some reason, I think my grandfather grew up a fan of John Wayne and Westerns and passed that on to my dad. And then, that got passed down to me. And so I kind of lived around much more ancient history, castles and things like that. And for some strange reason, they never really touched me in the same way that, for my 40th birthday, I ran away to Montana and rode horses for a week.
Wow.
And went to the site of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Custer's last stand, because it had been something which had, always fascinated me and intrigued me. And I do remember I mentioned to some friends of mine before I went that I was going to Montana, and they said to me, "Oh, we went to Montana." I said, "Oh, what did you think?" They said, "There's nothing there." I said, yeah, there's kind of. I think you've missed the point of Montana.
Right.
That's why I want to go. I think you've wildly missed the point there. So, for me, in a way, when I stood on the Great Plains of Montana for the first time, it moved me and touched me in a way that standing next to a old medieval castle in England just never has. And I don't know why that is. I can't explain that. It's just some kind of childhood romance, I think, that it's just in my marrow, in my blood. And yeah, I mean, I have thought about maybe doing something about English history as well, but my passion, I think, is for that more recent. There's something about I don't know. Maybe I can feel more closely connected to it. It feels obviously it's much more recent, but it feels more like, I think I've always been fascinated by the moon landings as well. I think for me there's a connection between arriving in the Americas and arriving on the moon, that these places are similar in terms of, they didn't know what they were going to find there. They had to make new lives for themselves, but kind of bringing with them facets of their old lives. I mean, I think partly to do with the Shirley Collins film that we made, which is very Shirley Collins, for those who don't know, is a English folk singer who's still alive. And when she was a much younger woman, she travelled around the deep south of America on a song collecting trip with Alan Lomax, the great American ethnomusicologist who people may have heard of. And Shirley kind of found a lot of songs when she was with Lomax that were old songs from the old country, if you like, that, as we know, have been preserved in the Appalachians for hundreds of years while they died out back in the UK. And so there's something interesting for me in that. This is partly to do with the Daniel Boone thing as well, that idea of people in a new land who bring with them vestiges of the old life and songs and stories, and they use those songs to both forge a new life for themselves in a new world, but also to give themselves some connection to the roots from whence they've come. And I think it's amazing that those songs have managed somehow through a purely oral tradition have been passed on to us now. We have these songs that those people would have sang when they got off the boat and first set foot in the Americas. We know the songs that they took with them.
Sure. And I feel like, Tim, your open-mindedness, the fact that you're so open-minded, you're so educated, you're clearly talented, I feel like that helps you not only as a documentarian, but as an actor as well, because, I look at, you graduated, I hope I pronounce this right, Dartington College?
Dartington.
Which is no longer there, right? It's or the program you were in is not there?
It's not, yeah, it's gone, Derek. It was a sad day when they closed that college. For me, it was. I was lucky they invited me down to speak at the closing. There was a festival to kind of not celebrate, I guess, commiserate the ending of the college, and I was invited down to be one of the speakers. It was a unique place of learning in the UK, and they moved the course to a different part of the country, but it's not. It can never be the same. There was something about the location of this college. It was up on a hill, surrounded by fantastic countryside, and it was a 4-year course, which I found so helpful because for the third year they basically kicked you out of college and said, right, go off into the real world and get some actual experience of theatre. It was a theatre course, and then come back for your final year and apply what you've learned in the real world to your final year of education. And that to me was the key to it, that it had a connection to the real world rather than this little bubble of education, which then when you do graduate, you're suddenly exposed to the real world and you're not prepared for it. And so I went and lived in London for the first time, actually, when I was kicked out for my third year, and spent some time with a theatre company. And that's where I really began to find my voice, I think, as a playwright. And yeah, the course isn't there anymore. But I'm quite an anomaly in that I have gone on to have a career as a mainstream actor, having graduated from Dartington College of Arts, because most people who go there have a much more kind of left field career afterwards. They don't tend to go off and be, in films and TV. They tend to go off and work in performance art or theatre and education, or make kind of community art projects. It's quite an anomaly to have been there and ended up being an actor on film and TV.
Yeah, my next question too was how much of who you are, you clearly answered this too, but how much of who you are as an actor came from that experience of getting your BA, your theater BA. But it's pretty clear that you really enjoyed your time there, and it really played a big part of who you are as an actor today.
It played a massive part in the shaping of me as a human being, and that feeds into my work as a writer, documentarian, and actor for sure. And there was a lot of, I think, partly because it was the 4-year course as well, it felt like there's a bit more space to. I mean, I ended up doing loads of other stuff while I was there that was not part of the curriculum at all. These shows that I was talking about, the kind of comedy sketch shows, were nothing to do with the coursework. They were just, we had a bit of spare time. I had some like-minded friends, and we had some theatre spaces and access to lighting, and we could put on shows if we wanted to. But we were not getting assessed on it. It was not part of the course at all.
Right.
And on one level, I feel like I learnt almost as much doing that as I did on the course, because it gave me a chance to try things out, fail, succeed, but I wasn't being judged on it. It was just, I was given enough rope to kind of run with a few things. And, it worked for me. That course was perfect for me, I think. And it was also not a very strict training in terms of you were asked to do other disciplines. You acted, but you were taught a bit about lighting design, choreography. You did a bit of directing. It's where I first actually picked up a camera and made things, and first ever used editing software to start putting things together. So again, that if I'd have gone to a straight acting school, I would have not had any of that. I may have been a better fencer, perhaps, but I would not have had the other skills that I had outside of acting, if you like.
Yeah,
well.
Yeah, it's well said, and I hope you don't mind me bringing this next thing up. I thought I researched this and heard this in an interview, and if I didn't, it's going to be really awkward. I had a guest, I want to say, I always bring him up because he's such a legendary guest. His name is Austin Pendleton. He's a huge theater guy in the U.S., and,
right.
And he dealt in his life with a speech impediment quite a bit. And one of the things he's known for is the movie My Cousin Vinny, in which he played a guy who has a speech impediment. And while it's a comedic part, he had a lot of trouble with it on a number of levels because it reminded him of things he fought through. I thought I read where you had a speech impediment as well, and how did, if you did, how did you battle through it? How do you kind of deal with it? Talk a little bit about that. If I'm overstepping my bounds, Tim, I completely apologize.
You're not, Derek. I think it was not so much a speech impediment as I had an accent, a regional accent, and I mean I still I still, to some people, I mean, I don't speak like a typical Londoner, although I've lived in London for 20 odd years now, and I feel like a Londoner. But the accent that I had when I first went to college was much more regional and much more rural. And I had a problem with pronouncing my THs, and I still do. I will say "f" instead of "the."
Okay.
And it's interesting. My daughter, we're struggling with this with my daughter. In fact, we were talking about it only today. We were trying to get her to stick her tongue out to say the instead of the. So the THs were a problem for me, and they still are. There's something I'm always aware of, having a loose th instead of a the. You got to stick that tongue out, Derek.
Yeah. So you know what it reminds me, Tim?
I'm exaggerating now, but my voice was a bit more like this when I went to college. I sounded like I was a farmer.
I got it.
People they ridiculed me for it. So I basically slowly tried to take the edges off of my accent to make it a bit more neutral. Is what I did. Yes.
It reminds me, Tim, a little bit. So where I live in Massachusetts, Massachusetts, where I live, if we're talking about an automobile, we say car. If I was from Boston, the way they pronounce cars, they say car. Yeah, cab. I got to start the car because my car's in the yard. I got to move. So is it like a regional thing like that? Am I just kind of pushing it here?
No, it is. It is. I think it's harder for us to. I think for English people, it's harder for us to sometimes hear the regional variations in America. And I'll tell you what's weird about it is America is so vast, and there are regional variations. But for a country that big, you'd expect them to be more, I think, considering how small the UK is and how much variation of dialect there is in such a small country. Always amazes me. But we can hear some of it. I mean, we can hear there is, that there's a West Coast sound and definitely Boston sound. And I mean, there's definitely that. I don't know if people still have that Kennedy accent, but that's I can always hear that kind of Massachusetts JFK, the air.
Yes. Well said. Yes.
All breathe the same air. And then we can hear a southern accent, but I think to us most of the South sounds the same, sounds roughly the same. And I know it's not quite as clear as that, but I spent some time in Canada, which I loved, and I loved that slight variation, the kind of. And you get it up in, you've got that Fargo accent as well, which seems not a million miles from the Canadian accent, which has got that strange, that little kind of Scottish burr in it to me when they say a boot instead of about. And I can always spot a Canadian when they say a boot.
Yes.
Yes, it's like the Scottish. It's got a Scottish. I don't know. It's just fascinating, all this stuff where these. And it's interesting that country accent that I had, the one that starts like that, it's the West Country accent in England, but I think those are the same people who would have got on the boat in Plymouth, right, gone across the water there, and then you get right there, and it just goes straight to the American thing like that, and you can see how those two accents are connected.
Wow.
For me, it's like, I remember doing that once in my mouth. Those two accents just merged into each other, and I just kind of could feel, 200 years of history kind of,
well
okay,
done.
I can see where the accent comes from.
Yeah, and you and I are talking about accents and history, and you got me thinking about an episode I saw of The Crown on Netflix where Jackie Kennedy is on, using her accent, and Elizabeth is doing her, and it's one of the most beautiful episodes I've ever seen, I think, of any show, but it's just really beautiful.
Absolutely,
yeah. So, one of the things I have to ask you, I invited you on for your beautiful filmography, your talent, everything you've done. I swear the last thing that I'm like, wait a second, because I'm an enormous Game of Thrones fan, and you and I were exchanging emails, and you're like, I guess you want to talk about Game of Thrones. I'm like, what's he talking about? And I'm like, holy, yeah, I'm like, I said, I know he looks familiar, but like my whole thing was, and we're going to get to it in a moment, is your beautiful work on Afterlife, which I'm going to get to in a second. But I never put together that you're Black Walter Rivers. I just didn't put it together. I'm not like a casual fan. Like I am obsessed with cinema and television, so I do apologize for that.
No, that's good. I was pleased about that. It was just kind of my assumption, and that's the thing not that I talk about my career often, but when I do, it's usually the thing that people want to talk about, or that comes up, or it's the one thing that people don't recognize me from it, but it's the one thing, as an actor, if you let it slip that you are an actor to somebody, the first question will always be, oh yeah, what have you been in? What have I seen you in? And it's just such a horrible question, or certainly has been a horrible question for most of my career, because what would then happen is I would stand and start listing things that I had been in, and the person would say, no, I haven't seen it. No, never heard of it. I saw that. It was rubbish. Wow. But finally, I have this thing where I can say, have you heard of a show called Game of Thrones? Well, I was in that. Okay, that's like, and sometimes they'll have seen it and will know what I'm talking about. But even if they don't, it's finally a kind of mark of, oh, okay, you were in. I have heard of that show. Okay, so you were in that. So you're kind of it's kind of legitimized my whole career, if you like, by saying, well, if I've done nothing else, I was in that show. And
no, that makes me angry though, Tim, to hear you say that, because I feel like people are so disrespectful. Like, let's say you were never in Game of Thrones as an actor, as somebody whose filmography and I look at what you've accomplished. You've done some really amazing things, and for people to say list it off, and I can see them doing that, and that's what drives me. There's a lot that drives me crazy about fans, but that's one of the things. I would be so much more abrasive in my answer to them, but that's a very disrespectful. As an actor, I think I would be, excuse the expression, pretty pissed off if they asked me that.
I would, to be honest, I would always try and avoid talking about it. I hate the question when it comes up. What do you do? But I just always try to avoid it, because I just feel it's funny. I mean, I feel much more comfortable talking about my and it's great that you started by talking about that. I genuinely feel much more comfortable talking about my work as a writer or a documentarian or as a director than I do about my acting work.
Yeah, that's like when I wanted to start a podcast, and it's done really well, and I want to paint a big picture. It's not looking at somebody through a very narrow lens. It's like, wait a second, this person's a really accomplished person who has dedicated his or her life, and you're a perfect example of that. You have if you not to be repetitive, but if we throw away Game of Thrones, you are still that doesn't change your validity or ability as an actor. You're still a very talented guy. So that's where I'm coming from on that.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you.
So and I'm going to follow it up with this. Are the pie jokes, and I mean, like, do people have a hesitation inviting you to weddings? Like, do those jokes get too much after a while, or are you do you have fun with that?
It's usually me making those jokes, to be honest, Derek. So no, I can't say I've had enough of those, because it's usually at my insistence that those jokes are made. Yes.
Yes. So when I was looking at your looking at your life as in a big picture, I came across this meme, and I feel like a 15-year-old for saying this, but I laughed like a little, like I was like an adolescent. It said R.I.P. It had your picture. It said "Rest in Pie." Like, I was like, really? That's. But anyways, it was really silly.
I've got a T-shirt somewhere which has got. I don't know if you have these. So in the UK, we have these pies that you can buy in a tin, and you'll love it. If you've not heard of this, you're going to love it. They're called Frey Bentos pies. Frey. You've got the word Frey. It's spelled differently.
But it's Walter. Yeah, it's Frey. I get it. Yeah.
F-R-A-Y, not F-R-E-Y.
Right.
And they're called Frey Bentos pies, and we've had them in the UK since, I think they first came in at the end of the Second World War. So I grew up eating Frey Bentos pies as a kid in the 70s. They were actually originally made in Uruguay. I found this out as part of my research about Frey Bentos. And so I have a T-shirt, which probably only works in the UK, which is a Frey. So it's a picture of a tin of Frey Bentos pies, but it says Frey Westeros pies.
Okay.
Well, I can't look. If anybody, I have no leg to stand on in terms of telling people to stop making pie jokes, because I'm basically the chief culprit.
Yeah, and I would imagine people are very hesitant inviting you to weddings, a little bit weary. But you know what I wanted to say is, and I'm so the timing is impeccable for this interview, because I was watching last night on HBO. They had a table read, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with this. Are you aware that this happened yesterday, Tim?
The documentary.
Yes, the documentary. They showed the table read. Yes,
I was watching that just before I spoke to you. I started watching it, and I got as far as the table read. That's where I stopped watching.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm not an actor. I could never do your job, even a fraction of what you do. I'm just. This is why I admire and love people like you. But I have to say, once in my lifetime, I want to be at a table read just to watch. Because Kit Harington finds out for the first time what happens, and his reaction is so beautiful. I don't know. It was just like, but you're a part of that too, even though you weren't at that table read. You've been at those. You're a huge part of the show. And it's, I just think there's been, and I'm going to get to this in a little bit, there's been a lot of, the last two episodes with people wanting to rewrite things. It really makes me kind of nauseous and sick for people to kind of go down that road, because what they should have said to the cast, to you, to the writers, is thank you. Thank you for giving me entertainment for 8 seasons, 7 seasons, 9 seasons, whatever, including the movies. I mean, am I coming from a healthy place when I think like that?
I'm totally with you, Derek. I think there's a point in fandom when it tips over, and I didn't feel it happened with Game of Thrones until this series, and it just I don't want to upset anyone, but I like fantasy shows, sci-fi shows. I like other kinds of things as well, but I grew up watching Star Wars. Star Wars changed my life when I saw it in 1977 on the big screen. I'm a massive comic book fan as well. I grew up reading American comic books, which is partly, I think, where my fascination with Americana comes from, reading Marvel and DC comics and kind of thinking, wow, what is this world? Where do these stories take place? It seems so exciting. They have things like baseball and Twinkie pies. I don't even know what this is. Kool-Aid. What is that? Look at that. My goodness. But so I followed, there are shows and things that I have followed as a fan throughout my life. And I just see a point when things tip over for people and they stop enjoying it. It becomes too important for them. And at that point, I just feel like saying to them, please leave the house. Please go outside the house. It's just a TV show. That's all it is. And it's really good. And you've gone too far with it. You've just tipped over into something else, and it's not healthy.
Oh, I totally.
Just be thankful that you've got this. This, yes, it might not. I mean, when people talk about this, what have they done? This poll to rewrite it.
Oh, that stupid petition.
How many people have signed it? And that gets the publicity. But it's how many people watched the episodes? Something like 17 million, and a few thousand are saying rewrite it. So does that? But that also means that 16.5 million people thought it was good, but they're not getting that. That doesn't get any press. What gets press is 300,000 people saying, "Oh, they should rewrite the whole show." I feel let down. And yes, look, people have invested a lot of time in it, and I just worry that sometimes people's passion for something can tip over into something else.
Amen, amen, my friend. I have to say, if those hater fans were watching that table read, it's clear how those actors, including you, are passionate about this work and how much they love it. And when you shit all over something the way they do, I feel two ways about it, right? I feel like I think it's a little deeper than a show. I feel like they're miserable with maybe just more than just a show. Maybe it's their life, maybe it's the job, maybe it's whatever. But it's clear from yesterday's table read how much these actors and writers and crew and they really you're going to see this when you continue watching. They focus on this guy who's an extra, and it's just so so beautiful. Like, I don't know, I get so angry, and I have to step away because they should be saying, and I don't want to get repetitive, but they should be saying, thank you for all you've done. You and I, Tim, if you and I watch a show, you and I can debate how something should have gone. We could talk about the first Star Wars, right? We could say this should happen, or I love the way so and so did this. But it's like, it's healthy. That's what shows and movies are supposed to do. But when you're talking about rewriting, I mean, I mentioned this to an actor I had from South Africa. He was like, well, if they're this motivated, tell them to write their own show and write a script, and if it's this easy, then just do it. And I was so upset at those fans and so sick to my stomach.
Well, Derek, I think that is the positive twist to put on it, that I would say as well. If you think you can do better, then show me.
Right.
And I would love it if you did. And that reminds me of an experience I had, actually. I went back to my college, Dartington College of Arts, after I'd made my first 3 short comedy films, and they were showing them at my old college, and I was so thrilled to see them on the screen at my college, where I had seen, influential films when I had been a student there, and there were these films up there that I had made, and I sat in the cinema, this very, very small little cinema at the college. And there were some students sat right in front of me. They didn't know I was there, or they didn't know who I was anyway. And during the film, they were saying disparaging things about the film, and kind of basically saying, who is this? These aren't very good. Who is this guy? He came here 10 years ago, and he comes back thinking he's, somebody special because he's made some films. They're rubbish. And at the time I was livid, obviously, and I almost kind of leant over and attacked them. But I thought about it for a while, and I thought, no, do you know what? If you're a student, and I remember what I was like as a student, and somebody who was here 10 years ago comes back, shows his films, thinks he's somebody special, and you sit there and think, I can do better than that, that's absolutely what you should be thinking as an 18-year-old. Get out there and show me. But get out there and show me you can do better. Because that's absolutely the right attitude when you're a young person trying to be creative. You've got to think you can do better. You've got to think, I can change the world with my art. And that is about, if you're going to say that, now go out there and show me. Go and show me what you're going to do in 10, 15, 20 years' time. Show me a better show than Game of Thrones. And then you're quite right to have said, that was rubbish and I could have done better. But you got to show me.
Yeah, that's so well said. And it's like these fans feel like they're owed or deserved something. I feel like it's systemic of a bigger problem, Tim. And I don't know, like when you read social media, and I have to stay off of Twitter because it's a cesspool in many ways.
Yeah,
so it is. And everyone's like, well, not everyone, but the haters are their go-to line or quote is quote unquote bad writing. I mean, these people who are saying bad writing wouldn't know writing if they read they would call Hemingway bad writing. Like, they don't understand. It's just their cop out of being negative, bad writing, this or that. When I watch Game of Thrones, I'm blown away, and I'm a pretty good judge of what good writing is. And my goodness, I mean, not to harp on this too long, but my goodness, Tim, I just feel some people have lost their way in what TV and cinema are really made for. It's gotten way too personal.
Way too personal. You're right. I think, but that's the thing. I think it becomes too personal for them. it becomes their life rather than just a show that they like watching.
You got it. You got it.
I mean, that's a dangerous kind of. That's not what it should be.
So.
And anyway, I think my last point I would say about that would be, if you're. No, let's leave it. We don't need to keep going on, banging on about it.
All right. But you know what? You and I have made a good point about this, and I'm happy you discussed this with me. And let's talk a little bit about your character, Blackwalder Rivers. How would you describe him? He's got a temper. He's dark. He's the bastard son of Walter Frey. How do you? Is it tough to prepare for a part like this? Do you put yourself in another place? How does a very skilled and wonderful actor like yourself prepare yourself for a very dark part like this?
I think most people who know me would say I'm quite a nice, sweet human being. So
yes.
It was, that's what the challenge is, but that's also what's fun about it, to play somebody who's, not really anything like you as a human being. Those are the more fun parts. And well, maybe they're not, but they're not more fun than doing other things that are a bit closer to home, but there's definitely there's something cathartic, I think, about being able to play somebody as vicious and nasty as that, and to kind of maybe vent a little bit of inner anger and hatred, but kind of do it in a safe environment, just pretending with friends dressed up. I tell you, the nicest thing about doing that role was the fact that the character came back in, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 seasons after the Red Wedding, but it was such a nice experience to get the call to say, can you come back?
Wow.
And I didn't have to audition again. It was, it's your role. The character's coming back. And just arriving back in Belfast, where we shot all of my stuff, and just going into my trailer and just seeing the costume hung up there. It was just, I just would always remember that experience. It was just such a lovely experience to just be reunited with the character, if you like. By seeing the costume hung up, the character was hanging there, ready for me to get back into, because it had such a distinctive, strange codpiece bit of the costume, which we always thought it looked a bit like a duck-billed platypus that had been skinned and flattened and turned upside down, so that the platypus's beak was cupping one's genitals, if you like. And you had to be tied into this costume as well. It was really tight, and it was lots of lace, and you needed to go to the toilet before they put you into that, Derek, because you really didn't want to have to go to the toilet any time during the day, because it was an absolute nightmare to get out of the costume. We were basically sewed into the costume, and it was I was pretty dehydrated most days filming as well, because I didn't really try and drink. I didn't want to drink anything, because you just did not want to have to go to the toilet. It was because it was just, yeah. Yeah,
for those that need to be reminded, or if they've been living under a rock, you were in 6 amazing episodes, including maybe what is essentially the best episode in Game of Thrones history with the Red Wedding.
Yes.
I've talked to some The Walking Dead actors, I've talked to a few of them, and when they do, so if one of them plays a villain and they do something evil, some of the fans kind of, I don't know that they... the line between fiction and nonfiction is a little blurred. So when you slice Catelyn Stark's throat at the Red Wedding, I'm sorry if I sound elementary here, but do you get hate mail? Do you get what the hell?
No, I've never had that, but I hear of stories where it does happen.
Yes,
where people can't separate the fact from the fiction. I mean, I would think to praise Game of Thrones fans after having a go at them, or a minority of them earlier, I think they're intelligent enough on a show like Game of Thrones to know the difference. I think there are some shows where maybe they don't know the difference. But I've never had any hate mail. for it all. I just normally got people shock horror, and then, can you pretend to cut my throat with this plastic knife, and I'll take a photo. That's what I normally get. No, I've never had anybody thinking that it was real. So,
no, and it's a huge role because not only because of what you do, we get to see you really display your acting chops, which is a treat for great fans, which is most of the fans of Game of Thrones. We see you, what happens to Catelyn Stark, how your demise is met. We talked about Pie, so. Your whole experience with that is, and you'll see this when you finish watching the documentary, I get the feeling that being on this set is a very, very, very positive environment.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a real machine as well. I mean, and they have 3 units going sometimes. Usually they've always got 2, and sometimes towards the end of filming they have a 3rd unit that comes on. They have Dragon unit, Wolf unit, and then White Walker unit, which comes on when they're, we've got to pick some shots up now. We'll need another unit, and they're working in different parts of the world concurrently, and so it's a real. And some of the actors are needed in different locations and need flights, hotels, all of these things. So it's a massive logistical thing as well. Beside, above and beyond, the quality of the show, just literally running it logistically is a massive thing in itself. So I was very aware of that when I was on it. I mean, I have this memory of when we filmed the Red Wedding, and it took us a week. My memory is it took us a week to film the scene of the Red Wedding. And, it's a big scene. There's lots of food on the tables as well. And I remember the food was not being replaced. So by the end of the week, the fish, I mean, it did not smell pleasant in that room by the end of the week, because the food had just basically slowly been rotting on the tables all week. And when, at the end of the episode, when I stepped forward and slit Caitlyn's throat, Michelle's throat, that was the last thing that we shot, and it was partly done because of the mess that it made. It would, once the throat is slit and the prosthetic is slit and the blood all pours out, Michelle is then covered in blood. So she would need to get completely changed. So it made sense to wait until the end to do that. But it also made sense because they wanted that to be the last thing that Michelle did on the show, so that she would take her personal emotion into the scene and into the moment. She knew this was her last act on the show, if you like. And I just remember it happening, her dropping out of frame, me walking out of frame, standing then just waiting to hear cut, waiting then to hear if they thought they had got it or whether they wanted to do it again, which would mean getting Michelle cleaned, recostume, resetting the prosthetic, resetting the blood banks, everything. It would have taken a long time to reset everything and do it again. And then they said, no, we've got it. That's a wrap. And I just remember feeling quite uncomfortable then at that point that I'd done this thing, but more that it was, I just didn't feel I was in. I actually remember walking off set on my own and walking back to my trailer, not wishing to be there because it felt like a very emotional moment for the people who had worked on the show for a long time, and certainly for Michelle and for Richard, who played Robb Stark as well. They'd been such a big part of the show, and they'd just had this very emotional send-off that I didn't feel it was my place to hang around and be a part of it. So I just remember putting my head down, almost as if I'd really done this dastardly deed, and just walking off set as quickly as I could and getting back to my trailer and shutting the door and letting them have their moment. And I've never really spoken to anyone or told anyone that before, but I just felt that it wasn't my place to be to be a part of it, and to be part of the farewells or the. And I went and saw Michelle afterwards. After we'd all got changed out of costumes and everything, and that was fine. But I thought, in the moment, in the heat of the moment, and the emotion, there was real emotion in that room. It didn't feel that I should be there.
Wow, that's really that's absolutely beautiful, Tim. And I have to say, it gets me thinking. So yeah, it's clearly it's a emotional moment for Michelle, but people don't think. I mean, you're clearly a very good human being, very kind. so that I never thought of it that way. That certainly weighs on you too, because I hate to keep going back to this documentary, but it's a good point of reference, because I was watching Sophie Turner yesterday, and they show this, and you'll see it. She had this emotional scene, and then when the camera stops, she's still crying. Like it's not like acting. It's this actor has clearly put herself in a place of real depth, the same way you did, the same way Michelle did, and it's so beautiful to see. I hope beautiful is not the wrong word, but it's so pure. It's pure emotion, and I love seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, there are some shows and some things you do where you can do something full of emotion, but the minute the camera stops, you can be having a laugh. And in a way, I don't think that makes the show any less deep or resonant, or what you're doing less convincing. But that's certainly in that moment, I really felt there was a very powerful emotion in the set, in the room on set, and I should not have been there. It wasn't for me to be a part of it.
Wow, very humble person you are. I'll tell you that, Tim. Before I let you go, I have to talk about Afterlife. This has affected me as a fan. This has affected me personally, and when I say affected, I mean in the most beautiful way possible. My God, are you amazing? And I'm sorry I sound like a fanboy, but my God, are you amazing as Julian? My God.
Well, I was kind of hinting at this earlier. I mean, that's it's in a way a character which is much closer to me as a human being. I'm not saying I live on the streets and take heroin regularly, but Julian is much closer to me than Blackwater Rivers in terms of his humanity, I think.
Yes.
And so I think that's what I was saying earlier. It isn't always more fun to play characters that are nothing like you. It was fun to do Blackwater Rivers, but it was also, amazing to be able to do a character that felt much more human and closer to my own sensibilities with Julian. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a show that's made me laugh so hard 1 minute, and then I'm bawling my eyes out the next. Like, I don't know what it is. I just feel like what Ricky Gervais has created here, what you've created, is just, I don't have the vernacular to describe it. Like, I know people always say, you got to watch this show, you got to watch that show. No, you legitimately have to watch Afterlife, because it is nothing short of amazing.
I think Game of Thrones aside, which is its own thing, I think I haven't been involved with the show previously, which has had the kind of word of mouth impact that Afterlife has had, in terms of it being, you have to watch this show, and that's been really exciting. And it's been so exciting as well to be part of something. It's my first experience of Netflix, so it's my first experience, again, Game of Thrones aside, because it's its own thing. It's my first experience of doing something which then goes out to the world at the same time. So it means the response that I've been getting has been from everywhere, and from every corner of the world that I've ever spent time in. I've been getting messages of support for it, because everyone's able to watch it at the same time. My previous experience mainly is doing stuff in the UK and it going out here, and people seeing it here, but not this sense that it goes out to a global market, and people can as they do, sit down and watch the whole thing in one sitting, which people have done, and some people I know have just instantly watched it again. They've watched they've watched it straight through, and then instantly had to start and watch it through again. And I've not had that experience before, and I know that even Ricky's been talking about it a lot, that he's never had a response to anything like this himself. He's done so many successful, well-received projects now, but he's never had anything to rival this in terms of its response. Who knows, if The Office had been on Netflix, 15 years ago, whenever it was, maybe he would have done. But I think he's been bowled over by the response you get from a popular Netflix show is like nothing he's experienced before.
Yeah, and there's popular Netflix shows that don't hit home like this does. I mean, this show is special on so many levels, and his character Tony, I feel like, is awful to people. He's this, he's angry, he's sarcastic, but he's so you can't describe it. Yet he's so loving, and he legitimately cares about people. But I have to say, I have one issue with Tony, and I've debated this in my own head. I feel like what he did, and I'm going to be careful because I don't want to ruin it for people.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, so is what he did to Julian, like, I know he's in a place of pain, Tony is. And there's a beautiful scene, I'm interrupting myself here, where Julian is, you look at Julian as, he's a thief, he's somebody who's into drugs, but there's this beautiful moment when they're both on the couch where you've seen the whole time how much Ricky Gervais is hurting. But then Julian opens up a little, well, maybe more than a little bit, and you see that his pain might be more than Tony's pain. And that's, to me, when I said, I have to find this actor, and I have to, for me, I lost it all. I lost it. And it's because of a great performance that you portrayed that I have to thank for that.
Well, thank you, Derek. I mean, it's interesting, that scene you're talking about, because it is the one that people have been responding to a lot. And it's actually, this is credit to Ricky, I think, knowing what he's doing as well, is that actually that scene was longer. There was actually, when I first saw that scene, I was really disappointed in it because there was a monologue that Julian had when he talked about the difference between how he saw himself as a spider, that you look at a spider and you find it disgusting, and you want to squash it. And I can't remember the monologue itself, but it was a much longer piece, and I remember really like thinking, oh, this is going to be great when it gets to the spider monologue, and then Ricky cut it. But he clearly, in the edit, has decided it doesn't need it. The emotion is there in the performance without it needing to be. I guess he felt that the monologue was kind of underlining what could be seen in my eyes, I guess, and it just didn't need me to spell it out. I think that's how I've come to appreciate that scene. It's that thing. Here's my experience as an actor. Whenever you work on something and you watch it back for the first time, you don't really watch it, or I don't anyway. What I see is I see the bits that aren't there, and I'm not seeing what's actually there. I see, well, why have they not? No, I didn't use that bit there, and there was that bit there that's missing. And maybe in the back of my mind, I'll be reminded, oh yeah, hang on, that's the day when we had chili for lunch. And I remember that location there, because round the corner, and I'm not really watching it.
Right.
It's kind of bringing back memories of doing the scene, but also the memory of the day. And maybe that, oh yeah, that was the day when we had that chat before we went on set about something. So it's only in subsequent watches that I actually watch the scene, and I actually let go, if you like, the stuff that isn't there, and look at what is there. And so I was really disappointed when I first saw that scene, and now it's one of my favourite things that I've ever been involved with. And I haven't spoken to Ricky about whether there was any dilemma about losing that bit of the scene or not, or whether it went very early on, or whether it was a late thing that they cut out for time. Might have been just for timing. You never know with these things.
You know, and I have that's so beautifully said, and I have to say, because I look at Julian, right, and you have been, for those that don't know, you are such a wonderful person away from the mic, just with your emails. You've been so kind, and I'm not going to mention anything, but you're just a very quality human being, and there's so many people in the world, Tim, that are like Julian, that are hurting so much. Like, I lost my father, and I've probably developed habits I shouldn't. I'm not saying it's at that level of Julian, but everyone is fighting a battle that, and I feel like Julian, your character, so beautifully kind of put out of nowhere, to hit you out of nowhere when people are watching that. He's struggling. People dismiss him as, oh, he must be this druggie, he's this, he's that. But no, he's a human. He's a human being who has been hurt, who is fighting through life, who just wants the things that all the other people want, and he's just in a bad place. And you really humanize this character.
Well, I think it's what people say. People who work with homeless people or people with drug issues, you know, they always say, you know, sit down, and these people have got a story to tell. There's a reason why they're sat there underneath that bridge with a paper cup asking for money. They haven't chosen to do that. It's not a career choice.
Right.
Something has happened. Take 10 minutes out of your life and just sit down and talk to these people. They will have a story. There will be a reason, and it will probably be really, really tragic. I'm as guilty as anybody of walking past homeless people in the street. You know, you get numbed to it living in somewhere like London. You do. You see it every day, and you just take it as part of the scenery, if you like. You know, it sounds horrible, but you kind of do, and you just have to keep walking. I'm trying to get to the tube. I haven't got time for this today. I'm trying to get my daughter to school. I can't engage with this.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the great things about the show, that Ricky decided to try and shed a light on these peripheral characters, if you like, in our society. So there's Julian, and then there's the sex worker Daphne as well. You know, that Tony's experience in his life has allowed him for the first time to actually engage with these people and try and find out a little bit about who they might be, and slightly go down this rabbit hole, if you like, slightly into this other version of our world, of our society, that most of us, you know, walk past every day.
Oh, that is so well said, because that's so true. Because I'm covering a Comic-Con. I covered it in Seattle last year, and the homeless population in Seattle is enormous. And you're right. We walk past these people not knowing stories, and I so agree with that. And you know, I have to say, I was yelling at the television set towards Ricky Gervais. I'm like, you know, Tony, I was like, will you please invite him to live in your home? Will you please? But something tells me that Julian would have not felt he's worthy of a thing. Julian, I don't think as a human being felt he should deserve to live in a home. I think he's that hard on himself. Am I accurate with that?
I think what Tony does is give Julian what he thinks Julian wants, and that probably is what Julian wants.
But let me interrupt you. But with all right, so I have to be careful because I don't want to ruin it for anybody.
Yeah,
I've gone back and forth with what you're saying, and I can't decide if it's good or bad, because I feel like Tony feels it's a good thing, but I feel like it's also like, oh my goodness, there's so many ways. Like I got to be careful what I say because I don't want to ruin it. But Julian is a human being who is savable. He is a life. I don't know. I just feel like it was almost selfish on Tony's part, but he doesn't see it that way.
Look, I think the real key to all of this, and if Ricky was here, I would say this, as I think I know there's going to be a second series. I think it'd be interesting to see how Ricky decides to deal with the aftermath of Julian.
Right.
Just if it's not even spoken about, or whether it becomes a thing, you know, because I think that's going to be the key to how people ultimately perceive that act, is how it affects Tony going forward. And I think if it's not really ever spoken about again, it could be a problem. And I think to make Tony, the fully rounded character that I think he is, I think it has to have consequences to him going forward. I think, but and I'm not just saying that because I'd like a flashback scene.
You deserve one, I tell you that.
I just think because he is a sensitive human being, and I think you would wrestle with that decision going forward. Did I do the right thing there? Was that the right thing to do? I think I would. Well, let's wait and see if there's more to come with the repercussions of what transpired. Yeah.
So I have 3 final questions for you. You've given me so much of your time, and you'd be long asleep by now if it wasn't for this selfish American. So I have to say, so Tony's a very difficult character to figure, right? Because he's insulting to his friends. Like I mentioned this earlier, he's really just hard on his friends, but he's so like somebody like the prostitute who people would dismiss, like, I don't need to deal with that. He embraces, he's kind to, and for the right reasons, not the wrong ones. So Tony's a really weird character to describe to anyone.
Yeah, he talks about it as being given a superpower. If you like, his grief has given him this superpower to basically say things that most of us think but would never say, and now he just doesn't care. So he's just going to say it. He's just going to do it because he just doesn't. He feels like he doesn't care anymore. He doesn't have to think about being polite or what's the polite thing to do here. I'm just going to say what I think, and to hell with it. And I think people like that can also be lovely people as well. I think you can have they can see the bad in the world and the good in the world, and you're not afraid to call it either way. Whereas probably most of us try and tread a kind of middle ground between the two for fear of being ostracized or saying the wrong thing, or I don't want to upset them, or he just doesn't he doesn't have any filter anymore. His filter kind of vanishes.
And you mentioned a scene where you had a really wonderful you kept going about a spider, and Julian kind of goes on. Do you get upset? And I'm not trying to make this a question where you're upset with Ricky or so forth, but does it any actor? I'll phrase it generally so it's not like a personal question. Did you get upset? Does that upset you when you're watching the show? You're like, wow, that was a really just great performance, or do you view it as, I'm an actor, I say the lines they want, and if they want to just cut it, then I guess I have to live with that. How do you view that? How do you process that as an actor when you've given a knockout performance, but it's like they edited something you really, really fell in love with?
I think, this goes back to what we were talking about right at the start, I think, Derek. It helps the fact that I make films as well.
Right.
And so I understand that sometimes you have to get rid of things, and it's very often not because it wasn't very good, but for a multitude of other reasons. It just didn't work. It doesn't work there's something, when you put these things together, they feel almost, I think, like a piece of music. And there's just a rhythm it develops, and sometimes something just gets in the way. It's just one beat too many or 2 beats too many, and it just has to go. It's not because it's not very good. It doesn't work for some reason.
Right.
And so the fact that I, not only make my own documentaries, but I edit my own documentaries as well now. I totally understand that sometimes you have to kill some of those babies. And you fight until the last moment with some of them, and it's got to go, but you don't want to, but you just wake up one morning and you just say, okay, it has to go. I will always miss it, but it just, for the good of the greater good of the whole thing, that bit cannot be there.
Yeah,
it's getting in the way.
Very well said, and I will end the interview with a statement/question. Boy, and I hate to make it with a pie joke, but boy, you cannot shake. You are really a part of David Bradley. Like, he is in the same show, right? Yep. So was that a coincidence, or is that just like, we love these two's rapport on Game of Thrones? Let's bring. How did that all turn out?
Look, Ricky's a Game of Thrones fan.
Okay.
As far as I know, and he picked, the great thing about, what was lovely about Afterlife is Ricky, there's very few people, certainly in the UK, who can do this, is that because of Ricky's track record, they can basically say to Ricky, here's X amount of money to make whatever you want to make, and who do you want to be in it? And there were very, very few people had to audition for Afterlife. Ricky just thought, who would I like for that? I'll ask them. Will they do it? Great. He's my first choice. And so you would just, he gets to work with who he wants to work and write the kind of thing he wants to write and make it the way he wants to make it. And it's very rare that people get to do that with that kind of money. But Ricky's earned the right, I think. So, yeah, I think he just chose people who he thought would be the best people for the role. And I remember my audition for it was a very weird experience. I mean, I was told I was going in for an audition, and I went to Ricky's office for this audition. And as I walked into the room, I could see some of the other cast who were already sat there with their scripts. It was like a table read,
right?
And there was a seat ready for me, and I was like, in the back of my head, I'm going, I'm not sure this is an audition. I think it's a read through, but I haven't officially been offered the part. But I think I've got the part, but I thought I was coming to audition, and I had to kind of keep myself in control and in check and be very cool and nonchalant, like I knew what was going on. And I didn't. And I sat and I read with everybody else, and then said goodbye to Ricky. And the way he was talking, he was saying, you can keep the beard, can you? That would be all right. And I was thinking, I haven't been offered this part as far as I know, but Ricky's talking like I have. And the minute I came out of the office, calling my agent, saying, what's going on? Have I got this part or not? Everyone in that room is talking to me like I'm doing it. And I thought I was just auditioning. So there was some kind of, I don't know, breakdown of communication. I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but it was a very weird experience for me, kind of going in thinking I don't know how many other people I thought were going up for that part. But it seemed like Ricky had said, that's who I'd like for that part, please. Can you get him in and we'll do a read? And I mean, maybe if I'd have been terrible in the read through, I wouldn't have got the part. So maybe it was an audition in that sense as well. But it did feel more like, I kind of think this guy will be right for it.
But that's gotta make you feel very special, and it's a testament to your abilities that Ricky Gervais wants you in that role. That's gotta feel really good.
Oh, totally. And there's nothing like that when you get. In fact, a lot of roles I've had recently have been ones that have just been offered to me that I haven't had to audition for because people, have known me long enough or seen enough of my work, and it just always. I think if you can do that, I can tell you from personal experience as an actor, when I turn up on set, I'm giving you more than 100% because I'm saying thank you for not putting me through that. You're going to get a good performance out of me every single time if you just offer me the part and trust that I can do it rather than making me audition. And again, as a filmmaker myself, I've made films where I haven't auditioned people because I watch TV like you do. I watch films like you do. I know who I think's good. It's like, well, let's ask them. If they can do it, they'll be brilliant. I don't need to audition them. If they can do it, they'll be great. So we just ask them. And that's how I've cast a lot of my short films earlier on. Were just they'll be that's the right person for the job. Ask them first. If they can't do it, we'll think of somebody else. But I don't need to do a big audition session.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say I don't know why more people don't do it that way, but I do know why more people don't do it that way. It's because, there's a hell of a lot of money at stake and there's multitudes of producers, executive producers, and everybody wants their say. So, it's not as easy as that. But when you're Ricky Gervais, you can do it like that.
Yeah, his name is Tim Plester. Tim, I mean, you're a very special actor. You're even a better human being. Is there anything that you wanted to get out there before I let you go?
If anybody's interested in watching any of my films, the film that we made about Morris Manning, the Kentucky poet that I mentioned right at the start, that me and Rob Curry made about Morris, is available to watch currently online for free. I don't know the URL to tell you, but it's called Matter is a Relative Matter with Morris Manning, and it's available on the Lush player. Lush being the cosmetics company who make very nice soap and hand gels. They have a streaming platform called the Lush player, and it's on there. You can find it on there. It's 42 minutes long.
Very well, and I'll tell you what I'll be watching in the next 42 minutes. Tim, you've been with me for almost an hour and a half. I can't thank you enough. Thank you for giving me time you'd usually be spending getting rest here, and unselfishly just being such a kind person. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me on. I've enjoyed that very much. Yes.
Tim, I stopped recording. I hope that was good for you. I hope I didn't bore you too much.
Totally not at all. I was really grateful that you'd done, a bit of research and were, aware of the breadth of what I've been doing. I guess it's my hope that, I'm putting in a certain amount of stuff out there into the world, and that I think a lot of people don't connect the dots, that they know me either as a documentarian, if they know me at all, or as, an actor from Game of Thrones, and a few people might know that I was in a few other things other than Game of Thrones, and very few people, know that I also make these documentaries and do those other things. So, I enjoy having multiple heads that I can pop on, and I enjoy that. And tomorrow I'm rehearsing for a new TV job, and I'm really looking forward to putting my actors head on and doing that. Last week I had my editor's head on, and I was editing footage of our road trip around Mississippi. So, that will go over there for a while, and I'll go and be an actor for this week. And then I think that keeps me alive and interesting. I think the fact that I can switch between different roles, if you like, and enjoy all of them for different reasons. I would get bored, I think, if I only did one of those disciplines.
Absolutely. And I tell you, if you ever want to come back on, I would love to have you back. You're just such a great guest to have on. You're an honest person. You're very interesting. It's the ideal guest.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for reaching out, genuinely.